One of the biggest mistakes you can avoid when you buy a business is not to buy yourself a job. What I mean by this is that you end up being tied to the business and you end up working in it rather than on it. You'll have to do all the tasks involved in the running of the business. For example, tasks like making all the sales to the customers, placing all the orders to suppliers, doing all of or a major part of the work the business does for its customers, and then doing the paperwork at the end of the day too, which is instead of buying a business that has employees to do all of these tasks where they run the business for you, which leaves you free to work on growing the business and on business strategies instead. When you look to buy a business, you should be looking for businesses that are not heavily reliant on their owners. Because if a business is currently heavily reliant on the owner, guess what? It will be heavily reliant on you after you've bought it. This is why very small businesses are not worth buying. If you buy a business like this, you'll end up working very long hours, weekends, and then you'll be very unlikely to be able to take holidays too. Businesses like this end up running the owners into the ground, they get burnt out, and they'll have no quality of life. To avoid buying a business like the one I've just described, you must make sure you ask the owner the right questions. By asking the right questions, you'll uncover whether the business is heavily reliant on the owner, and if this is the case, you should avoid buying the business altogether. How I saved myself a massive amount of time, or actually I stopped wasting my time speaking with these types of business owners, was when I started looking at businesses with sales in excess of £1 million or dollars, and businesses that were making profits in excess of £100,000 or dollars too. Another reason why businesses like this are like buying a job is because the business is restricted to how big it can grow, which is very much like the amount you can earn with a 9-to-5 job, which is limited to how much your boss will pay you for the hours you do, and there are only 24 hours in a day. So, like a 9-to-5 job, the owners of a small business is similarly limited by the number of hours in a day required to do all of the work in a business that's heavily reliant on them, which will limit the growth potential. That's not to say you could employ people to do this work for you, but if the business is small, it probably won't be able to afford to do this unless you are prepared to sacrifice paying yourself until the business grows, as you employ more and more people to do the work and the profits grow to a level where you can pay yourself. But if you've just given up your day job to buy a business to replace your salary, you probably can't afford not to be paid unless you have an emergency fund to pay yourself until the business has grown. But why do that when you could simply buy a much larger business that has already gone through this growth stage and where you reap the rewards from someone else's hard work? A good example of a business where you end up buying yourself a job is if you buy a small cafe. With a small cafe business, you'll be restricted by the size of the premises. The size of the cafe is limited to how many tables can fit into the space. Then the amount of sales per table is then limited by how many customers can sit at each table, and then by how many times the tables can be turned each day with new customers. Consequently, the amount of profit this type of business can make will be limited too. All of these limits make it difficult or near impossible to afford to employ staff to completely run the business for you. But also, because the income is limited, as an owner of a small cafe business, you'll have no choice other than to do the work in the business in order to make it work. But also, the other problem for this type of business is that profits will be very low. And as a consequence, it will have limited money to pay you a wage that will make all the hard work worthwhile. It's almost better to remain employed in a 9-to-5 job than to own a business like this, because at least with a job, you are entitled to holidays, whereas with a business which is akin to a job, you probably won't be able to afford to take holiday unless you close the business down whilst you're away. Another example of a business that is akin to owning a job is a self-employed tradesperson. Tradespeople like plumbers, electricians and builders fall into the category of owning a job. And this is because the owner is the one with the relationships with all of the customers. They do all of the work for the customers, they do the quotes, and then they do the invoices at the end of each job. And when they want to take a holiday, the business income stops until they return. This is totally different to buying a much larger plumbing or electrical business that employs a number of plumbers or electricians, and one that has all the employees in place to run the business too. But of course, to buy a large business, it will be worth much more. And if you don't have the money to buy a much larger business, what do? So what I did to buy my $1 million business was to use other people's money to buy it. But instead of explaining how this works on this video, I've already recorded a video that explains how this works. A link to this video should appear somewhere on the screen to watch this now or later. If you have any questions on this topic about buying a business or on any other aspect about the process involved in buying a business, please drop a comment below. And always remember that no question is a stupid question. If you don't know it, you just don't know it. And by having the answer to the question you have might be all it takes to move to the very next step in your journey to buy a business. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.